NATO is a paper tiger. Without the USA, NATO is a paper tiger. It was a political earthquake. The President of the United States, furious that his allies refused to join a new war, was threatening to abandon the very alliance his country had built and led for 80 years. The statement landed like a shockwave across the world's media. Panic should have ripped through European capitals, but the panic never came. Instead, the official response was a masterclass in bureaucratic composure. We have noted the President's remarks. The alliance's principles remain our guide. This absence of panic, this strange, unnerving calm, is the most important signal of all. It raises the central question, what happens when the hegemon screams and nobody flinches? To understand why Europe wasn't afraid, you first have to understand the one decision made just weeks earlier that had already changed the alliance forever. That decision, the one that broke the alliance, landed at dawn on February 28th. It didn't come from a negotiating table in Brussels. It came from the sky over Iran. The world woke up to blinking push alerts on their phones and the same three words on every news channel, Operation Epic Fury. It was a coordinated, joint U.S.-Israeli campaign. Over the next 72 hours, cruise missiles and stealth bombers conducted nearly 900 strikes against targets deep inside Iran. Nuclear facilities the world had only read about in intelligence reports, gone. Hardened missile silos cracked open. The official line was that this was a preemptive strike to neutralize an imminent threat. But here's the critical detail, the one that changes the architecture of this story. This was not a NATO operation. There was no Article 5 invocation. There wasn't even a collective consultation where allies could debate the intelligence and the consequences. For 80 years, the core bargain of the alliance had been an unspoken rule. We decide together. We act together. That rule was just broken. And in that moment, the fundamental structure of the post-war order fractured. In every European capital, from Paris to Berlin, from Rome to Warsaw, leaders were facing the same impossible choice. The phone calls from Washington were already coming in, demanding logistical support, basing rights, and public declarations of solidarity. To agree meant validating a preemptive war they had no say in, and effectively turning a defensive alliance into a tool for offensive action. But to refuse, that meant openly defying their most powerful security guarantor in the middle of a hot war. It was a choice between betraying America or betraying the very principle the alliance was built on. The assumption in Washington, D.C. was that Europe, after some formal televised hand-wringing, would eventually fall in line, because that's what always happened. But this time was different. The response from the continent would not be a fractured mess of angry phone calls. It would be something quiet, unified, and strategically devastating. A response that began not with a political declaration, but with a single, legally precise sentence that would echo through the halls of power for years to come. That single, legally precise sentence was not a declaration, but a question of architecture. It was the principle at the very heart of the North Atlantic Treaty, Article 5. This article defines the alliance's mutual defense pact as purely defensive. It is a tripwire triggered only when a member nation is attacked, not when a member chooses to launch an offensive war. Because Iran had not attacked a NATO member, Article 5 was not triggered. From the European perspective, joining the American war was not an obligation. It was a choice. And in a quiet, coordinated cascade, they chose no. This wasn't just a political statement. It was a tangible, logistical line in the sand. As the United States prepared to move its assets, it found the pathways were suddenly closed. France and Spain denied access to their airspace for any related military flights. Key American logistical bases in Italy were suddenly unavailable for the campaign. Refueling permissions for long-range bombers were politely but firmly withheld. It was a coordinated refusal that effectively built a wall across the continent, grounded entirely in the alliance's own charter. This reveals a critical insight. In a system built on collective defense, the ability to say no to an offensive war is not a sign of failure. It's a sign of structural integrity. For the first time in decades, Washington was looking at Europe not as a collection of junior partners, but as a sovereign bloc capable of defining and defending its own interests based on the very rules America itself had helped to write. For Europe, this was a moment of sovereign clarity, a cool-headed, legalistic defense of the alliance's founding principles. But across the Atlantic, in the corridors of power in Washington, this was not perceived as a principled stand. It was perceived as a profound, almost unthinkable betrayal. And the fury it would unleash was about to test the very foundations of the Western world. The fury, when it came, wasn't a quiet diplomatic memo. It was a global broadcast. Suddenly, the news channels were a blur of breaking banners. White House accuses allies of betrayal. A stern-faced pundit asking, "Is NATO dead?" Another headline screaming, "A crisis of loyalty." It wasn't a debate about strategy anymore. It was a public relations assault designed to shame a continent into compliance. You could see the emotional shift in the body language alone. Gone were the composed, almost stoic faces of the European leaders from the last chapter. In their place, the angry, jabbing fingers of American officials at podiums in Washington, the United States, accustomed to its allies simply falling in line, did not see a principled legal argument. It saw disobedience. It saw disloyalty. The president himself set the tone, telling a stunned press corps that he was very disappointed with NATO because NATO has done absolutely nothing. His Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, went further, stating that if NATO denies base access for U.S. operations, it's not a good arrangement and the relationship needed to be re-examined. His Defense Secretary, Pete Hegseth, lamented that allies had provided roadblocks or hesitation instead of support. And right there, the terms of the alliance were being redefined in real time. Loyalty was no longer about a shared commitment to the North Atlantic Treaty. It was about unconditional, unquestioning support for America's actions. Europe's refusal wasn't seen as upholding the rules of the club. It was framed as weakness, ingratitude. This public campaign culminated in that now infamous phrase, reportedly uttered by the president and echoed by his team, calling NATO a paper tiger. But here is the critical point. Calling NATO a paper tiger because it refuses to join an offensive war is not a critique of NATO's weakness. It is a fundamental misunderstanding, or perhaps a deliberate reframing of what the alliance was built to be. It's like getting furious at your shield for not also being a sword. It revealed a chasm that had opened up between American expectations and European priorities. It was a spectacular display of fury from a scorned hegemon, a public, emotional meltdown broadcast for the entire world to see, which leads us to the one central, quiet question that has been hanging over this entire story. The question we asked at the very beginning. Faced with all of this rage, this pressure, these accusations from the most powerful nation on earth, why wasn't Europe afraid? The answer has nothing to do with sudden courage or defiance. It has to do with a quiet, decade-long project that was about to be revealed. And that is where we're going next. While Washington was consumed with performative outrage, demanding public displays of loyalty, Europe was engaged in something far more consequential. A quiet, structural pivot. They weren't preparing a response to a threat. They were executing a plan that had been years in the making, an architecture of resilience built on the assumption that American reliability was no longer a guarantee, but a variable to be managed. They were pricing in the risk. To understand this shift, you have to stop looking at diplomatic cables or policy papers. The decisive evidence, the blueprint Washington completely overlooked, wasn't written in prose. It was being tracked line by line on a spreadsheet, and what those numbers reveal is far more powerful than any presidential threat. The proof is not in a politician's speech, it's in the NATO balance sheets. The 20,000 NATO Secretary General's report laid it bare. In a single year, defense spending by European allies and Canada surged by a record 19.6% in real terms, reaching a total of $574 billion. This was not a token gesture. For the first time in the alliance's history, every single one of NATO's 32 members met or exceeded the 2% of GDP spending target. The combined spending of Europe and Canada reached 2.33% of their collective GDP. More importantly, serious discussions were already beginning behind closed doors on a new, long-term target of 5%. This isn't just meeting an obligation, it's building a new foundation. What this really signals is the core of the issue. The power of America's threat to withdraw was diminishing in direct proportion to Europe's rising self-reliance. This quiet, relentless investment in joint procurement, independent technology, and integrated logistics is what made the American leverage less effective with each passing year. This is why the absence of panic was the single greatest tell in this geopolitical poker game. It signaled that Europe held a stronger, quieter hand than Washington realized. Europe's response wasn't a sudden reaction, but the outcome of years of strategic patience. It raises a critical question for us. Is this kind of long-term, non-performative strategic planning a strength that other middle powers like Canada should be cultivating right now? I'm curious to read your analysis in the comments. This European pivot, which seems so contemporary, is not without precedent. To truly grasp its strategic depth, we have to look back to the 1960s, to a French president who confronted a very similar dilemma with a dominant American superpower. His solution then offers a chillingly precise blueprint for what is happening now. The message that landed in the White House on March 7, 1966 was an administrative earthquake. It was a formal notification from French President Charles de Gaulle to U.S. President Lyndon B. Johnson. The contents were stark and utterly unthinkable at the height of the Cold War. France, de Gaulle declared, was determined to regain on her whole territory the full exercise of her sovereignty. Effective immediately, it would cease participation in NATO's integrated military commands. And he gave the United States and NATO 1 year until April 1st, 1967, to remove every last soldier, every piece of equipment, and every military base from French soil. This included NATO's supreme headquarters itself, SHAPE, which would be evicted from Paris. The shock was immense. To the American establishment, this felt like a catastrophic betrayal, a crack in the very foundation of Western unity against the Soviet threat. But from de Gaulle's perspective, this wasn't an emotional outburst. It was a cold, strategic calculation. He saw an alliance dominated by the United States as a structural risk to France's independence, a mechanism that could entangle his country in distant American wars, like the escalating conflict in Vietnam. Yet the doomsday predictions never materialized. The alliance didn't collapse. It adapted. SHAPE was painstakingly relocated to Brussels, where it remains today, and France, now unbound, secured the strategic autonomy it craved, becoming a fully independent nuclear power. What looked like a crisis was simply an evolution. De Gaulle's logic, then, is the same logic guiding Europe today. Pursuing strategic autonomy wasn't an act of betrayal. It was the fundamental price of true sovereignty. But this historical echo, this pursuit of strategic independence, isn't happening in a vacuum. It's being driven by the hard reality of a war happening right now on Europe's doorstep. That war was Operation Epic Fury. And while the political drama was playing out in the halls of Brussels and Washington, the conflict that started it all was grinding to a bloody stalemate halfway around the world in Iran. Fighting without the full logistical and political backing of its allies, the United States was discovering the hard limits of its power. The initial promises of a swift, decisive campaign began to fade. They were replaced by the quiet, persistent hum of idling supertankers in the Persian Gulf, backed up for miles. They were replaced by the frantic, flashing red of stock market tickers from New York to London to Tokyo, as news reports of fuel shortages sent shockwaves through the global economy. Iran knew it could never win a head-to-head fight against the American military, so it didn't try. It deployed its ultimate weapon, not a new missile or a stealth drone, but geography itself, the Strait of Hormuz, the jugular vein of global oil. By severely restricting and at times completely closing that channel, Iran couldn't defeat the U.S. Navy, but it could hold the global economy hostage. As the economic pressure mounted, the military pressure escalated in turn. Footage began to surface. Grainy, chaotic images of a strike on a newly constructed bridge connecting Tehran to a major suburb. It wasn't a military installation. It was a civilian artery, a sign of a superpower becoming bogged down, frustrated, and discovering that its immense might was not enough. The result was a quagmire. It proved that in this century, conventional dominance is no longer the final word. The ability to disrupt a system, what we call asymmetric leverage, can neutralize an aircraft carrier with the flick of a geopolitical switch. And as the world was learning this lesson, as oil prices skyrocketed and supply chains buckled, a quiet, urgent question was being asked in Ottawa. A question every single Canadian needs to understand. Because when the global system freezes, Canada's unique vulnerabilities are exposed. What exactly were those vulnerabilities? And what did our leaders do when they realized the American security guarantee was no longer guaranteed? The response from Ottawa to that urgent question wasn't a panic. It was a pivot, a quiet, calculated recognition that when the American security guarantee is no longer unconditional, Canada's greatest vulnerability and its most significant opportunity both lie in the same place, the Arctic. For decades, the story of European strategic autonomy and American retrenchment seemed like a distant drama, but its consequences are now arriving at our own doorstep. The erosion of that old, reliable security architecture isn't just a problem for Berlin or Paris. For Canada, it carves out a narrow but critical strategic window to finally assert meaningful sovereignty in our own high north. As the United States shifts its focus and Europe builds its own security bubble, a power vacuum forms in the North Atlantic and across the polar region. This is a void that Canada, by virtue of geography, is uniquely positioned to address. Visualize a map of the Arctic. As ice recedes, new shipping lanes are opening, arteries for global trade. But these are also vectors for influence where Russian and Chinese assets are increasingly present. This isn't a theoretical threat. It is a practical geographic reality. The strategic analyses from institutions like the ISN and the Atlantic Council are clear. As NATO's reliance on the U.S. wanes, its strategic center of gravity will inevitably shift northward. This amplifies the importance of Canada's unique Arctic frontier. The call to action is therefore to leverage this position. It means deepening security partnerships with newly autonomous European states, particularly the Nordic countries who share our interests. And it requires targeted investment in the niche capabilities the Arctic demands, icebreakers to ensure presence, and advanced surveillance systems to maintain awareness. And this shift is already underway. The recent historic announcement that Canada has finally met its 2% NATO defense spending target is the key piece of evidence. The commitment to spend over $500 billion in the coming decade, with spending hitting $62.7 billion in 2025, is not just about appeasing an ally. As Prime Minister Mark Carney signaled at Davos when he said, "The old order is not coming back." This is something different. It is the first tangible down payment on a new sovereign strategic future. But hitting a spending target is a signal, not a strategy. It's the most straightforward part of the equation. True sovereignty isn't just purchased with new equipment. It demands a much deeper, more fundamental choice about the very structure of our economy and what kind of nation Canada truly intends to be. That choice is about the very architecture of our national prosperity. It's about finally acknowledging that for decades, Canada's economic and defense structures have been built on a convenience that has now become a critical vulnerability. For a generation, we treated our over-reliance on U.S. defense procurement as a simple fact of life. You can picture it as a single thick pipeline running from the United States directly into Canada's industrial base. It was efficient. It was easy. But in this new era of conditional commitments, a single pipeline is a single point of failure. By definition, it is a structural vulnerability. The blueprint for what comes next already exists. When faced with this same strategic uncertainty, Europe began to act. They diversified. They hedged. They started building resilient domestic capabilities and co-developing technology with a portfolio of trusted allies, not just one. This shift is not theoretical. It's already being reflected in strategic planning. Imagine a 2026 New York Times report detailing how Canada, after qualifying for the EU's massive $170 billion Security Action for Europe Fund, has begun an explicit policy to redirect billions away from U.S. arms makers towards our own domestic industry and new European partners. What this means is the old model, that single fragile pipeline, is being replaced. The new architecture is a network. It positions Canada at the center, with multiple resilient connections radiating outwards to our own revitalized domestic industry, to our European partners, and to allies in the Pacific. This is what genuine resilience looks like. It is not about cutting ties. It is about adding them. It is about having sovereign options. This is why the ongoing drama surrounding American commitment is, in the final analysis, a catalyst. It forces Canada to confront a choice we have deferred for generations. Do we continue in a state of comfortable but fragile dependency? Or do we embrace the far more demanding but ultimately more secure path of genuine sovereign agency? This is the sovereign choice. It means reframing this entire situation. The erosion of old guarantees is not a crisis to be feared. It is the necessary trigger to finally build a more resilient, independent, and ultimately a more prosperous Canada. If you believe understanding these structural shifts is key to Canada's future, subscribe for more analysis that connects the global dots to our national interest.